Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first meeting of the new year. I want to thank all of you who came in person. I also want to welcome all of those who are joining us online. I am Janet Hoffman, current president of the Western Horticultural Society. I want to welcome you tonight. So our next item is business. Did we hear from? Okay, cool. I'm going to introduce our new president, Grace, and she's going to talk to you about our scholarships. We resumed scholarships this year after many years of, or I think like 2 years, we weren't awarding scholarships, and Grace and our treasurer agreed to step up and create a new scholarship application, reevaluate our scholarship forms, and she's going to tell you more about it.
We're happy to announce that the scholarship is going to go to Madison Roger, and she's a student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in the Department of Agricultural and Environmental Plant Sciences. I think I'm not going to say anything further because she's going to tell us a little bit about what she's doing.
Hi, yes, thank you for the introduction. I am super honored and excited to be your guys' scholarship student. And I have actually prepared some slides to introduce myself and my work projects and my academic interests. I can't see you guys right now, but I can see my slides. And as you can read them, it says that my name is Made. And this is a presentation just to introduce myself and my interests. So I am a plant science student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. My focus has mostly been in native plants. It's what I realized I really liked in college. I grew up in kind of a suburban area, so, you know, like working with plants wasn't really a thing there. But once I got exposed to the green industry, I quickly realized that my interest was in native plants and environmental causes. And my specific interest has become like host plants of insects and native plants and how they work together in ecosystems. These pictures are mostly from my recent trip to Costa Rica. They had a lot of really cool bugs there. My personal favorite were these gigantic crickets. They don't look as big in the picture as they actually were, but was quite cool. Then this guy in the middle here is the only one that is not Costa Rican. That is a monarch butterfly. I actually had 6 monarchs this year on my milkweed plants. 4 made it to chrysalis. All 4 chrysalises hatched. That is the only adult I saw, so that's the only one I know really made it out healthy. But I am hoping and praying that the other ones did too. This is my current school project. The purpose of it is to implement conservation biological control. So all of these plants here create habitat for beneficial insects, specifically the lacewing, which is a native biological control agent of aphids and other soft-bodied insects, but especially aphids. You may be thinking, Made, why are you planting flowers for a predator? And the answer is that the larval stages are the predators, and as adults, they feed on pollen and nectar. So all these plants I grew from seed. The picture on the left is me with all of them right before planting. And then that is the site that I planted this year. A total of 800 plants went in. There is also pretty nearby that picture on the bottom right, another site that I planted that rests along a creek. They are all native plants. And when introducing them to the creek, we also see ecological beneficial impacts, including just general wildlife habitat and water protection. This is what I do at work currently. And most of the time it is kind of boring desk work. But every now and again, me and my coworkers get to go out into the field and we get to directly involve ourselves in the protection of endangered species. The bottom right picture is a restoration planting that we recently planted. This was for a construction project. Sorry, someone is echoing. Okay, that's good. Yeah, so we are the Public Works Department of San Luis Obispo County. We do construction work, and then me and my coworkers are the people who like come in afterwards and make sure that all the plants and animals are okay. We also get to do like field surveying to make sure that they aren't harmed in the process of construction. So say like we're gonna go trim some vegetation, we will go out there first and look for like endangered snails. And if we find anything, then we actually have to halt construction until the snail just like inches away. And it takes a really long time and people get really mad at us, but it's pretty fun. That top right picture is a California red-legged frog, which is a federally endangered species that is endemic to our part of California. And I photoshopped a pair of boots onto it because why not? The top middle picture is a wildlife cam picture I took myself because I found evidence that foxes and deer were hanging out together on a haystack. And within one day, we confirmed it. And that is a picture of foxes and deer on a haystack. And a funny story about that is that if you look at right above the fox, that is a Ziploc bag. And it's full of raw fish. And somehow that family of foxes like always finds Ziploc bags of raw meat, but we don't think it's coming from the same place because it's always a different kind of meat and a different Ziploc. And they always take it to the haystack and then eat it. So that is an unanswered question. Bottom middle is a barn owl that I got to catch and band for tracking. The bottom left is our restoration plants. We have a whole nursery that I get to take care of. It's a lot of fun. And the top left is a banana slug that I found while surveying for bats. He actually stayed on my hand for about an hour, and I feel like we formed a close relationship. On the more personal side, my two favorite things in life are cats and traveling. That bottom left picture are all three of my cats. Oh, actually, we just got a fourth, but as of like 2 weeks ago, that was all three of my cats. I should have added a picture of my fourth. But the top left is like my son cat. His name is Jojo. He is 6 years old. And he and I just have such a close relationship, and I love him dearly. The bottom two pictures are some of my experiences abroad. I've been abroad with my sister, that's in Costa Rica. And the middle one is with my best friend. Her name is Maddie. That is us in Denmark. And then the top two right pictures are just some of my artwork. The top right one is probably the piece that I'm personally proudest of anything I've done. That is a doll that is made of seagull bones and broken glass. And when you hold it up in the sun, it shines like a stained glass window, and it's pretty cool. That one was installed in a barn at Cal Poly. It's pretty exciting. And then this middle top picture is a sculpture of a cow that I built. Every single piece of it, besides the sign, was recycled. The body is made from recycled denim. The legs are logs from a tree that had been downed, and then the head is foam from Costco. So that was a pretty big project of mine that actually took surprisingly long to complete, but is also one of my personal favorites. Once again, thank you for listening to me speak, and thank you for the scholarship. It really is helpful and really will help me in my academic journey. And if you guys ever want to reach out, my email is madeliketheverb@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Madison. That was a wonderful presentation. Our speaker tonight is Del McComb. Del is going to share with us some of his expertise in biodynamic horticulture, correct? And how we can
Soils.
improve our soils to grow better plants in our gardens.
Thank you to all that came in person, and also thank you to all those online. This is my second hybrid Zoom meeting, so it's a little disorienting sometimes. You don't know who you're really addressing. So I will tend to speak to the people in the room, but hopefully those in the ether sphere can offer up some inputs and questions. I want to go fairly quickly through my talk and leave room for questions, because this is such a large topic, you know, growing from the ground up beautiful gardens, but that could be anything from a tomato patch to a native plant garden, or native South Africans, and what are the differences, and obviously can't go through every detail in one little short talk, but hopefully there's questions from folks, and that will help me guide my talk. First, a bit about me and my approach. I've been in gardening since I was 10. I insisted on mowing my parents' lawn, and then I insisted on taking out their juniper hedge and planting roses, and then I insisted on taking out their cotineaster hedge and planting lily bulbs, which mostly died, but it was still a wonderful experience. And I started in bonsai trees when I was also, it's 1976, so I was 11 then. So I was, funny, both my parents are history professors, retired of course by now, but I don't know where the gardening bug came from, but it's always been in me, and it continues on unabated to the point of insanity sometimes. We were talking about identity crises. I'm a farmer, I'm a horticulturist, I'm a designer, if I want to say that. How about I'm an attempted designer, attempted farmer, and attempted horticulturist, among other things. And my partner Karen and I currently, my main focus is our focus, which is Blossom's Farm. It's a biodynamic herb farm. We just purchased a piece of land, which is incredible, 2 weeks ago in Aromas, which is just a bit south of Wattsville, 45 acres worth, beautiful upsloping piece of land, long and narrow, busy road down below. And when you get up to the peak, you can't even hear the road, and you're amongst chaparral and some manzanitas and beautiful live oaks and beautiful vistas off in the distance. So we feel quite blessed, and we'll be setting up our new farm there with a small nursery component with all our 100+ varieties of medicinal and culinary herbs that we value add into products like skincare and dietary supplements. So one of my inspirations in life is Alan Chadwick, the cantankerous thespian, Shakespearean gardener who made the farm and garden program at UC Santa Cruz, put that on the map. And it's funny how Alan's work, I didn't know Alan, I was just a bit too young to know him, but in fact, our neighbors, for example, currently, Dennis is a Chadwick apprentice, and many of my strongest mentors have been Chadwick apprentices. So Alan said, you have to just give back more to nature than you take, and that you're going to be rewarded with incredible bounty. I'm paraphrasing his beautiful quote, and that is really simple. I could just make this talk really simple and say, that's it, folks. That's all you have to do is kind of don't extract and take. Try to give back something, and you'll be rewarded with this incredible bounty. There's a whole interesting movement called no-till, where you prepare the soil. Perhaps you do an initial till, and then you never disturb it again. You add mulching, you use plastic to polarize the weeds, etc. I think that's an interesting science, and it's evolving, and there may be some good parts to it, but it's a science that is a long way off from being practical. So a good old, again, Chadwick double dig might be a great approach, where you really can deeply prepare the soil one time, add some amendments, and then minimal till would be my approach. Try to minimize the till. The first time when you're really striking into ground that has never been worked, trying to bring in air, this is where my biodynamic side might come out, bring in forces from the above. We're not an island here on Earth. We're surrounded by the whole constellation of systems and we just think that those don't have influences on our Earth is kind of silly. So when you open the soil, you're kind of bringing in this life force and allowing certain processes to take place. If you till too much, you're allowing those processes to take place too much, and you start to deplete the soil. So it's about finding balance. So tilling must, I believe, at the beginning, and then mulching after that, once things are established. And what does that mean to mulch? Well, perennials and shrubs and trees, I would be a big advocate for wood chips. For annual plants, finer mulching can be good, just simply compost, or even rough compost, or a living mulch like clover or cover crops when season's done and you're done for the year. You want to cover crop soil. So always covering the soil with something to keep life forces in, to keep earthworms happy, to keep microbes happy, to keep moisture in, etc. Don't mulch too late in the year because you'll be locking in very cold temperatures in the soil. So it's better to mulch earlier, let's say in the fall before it gets too cold, or wait till spring till the soil warms again and then mulch before summer, before it gets too hot and dry. So mulching. Watering, I'm not really going to talk about, but it's a thing no one does correctly in my experience. I worked at Sunpress Nurseries for 5 years as director of horticulture there, which of course is in containers, and we had millions of plants in the ground. And it was one of our hardest challenges, even with all the high-tech sprinkler systems and timers and hand waters. And I know people in our gardens, we tend to overwater, tend to underwater. So be aware of the watering. If you really want to have a glorious, healthy soil and garden, have good tillage, good mulching, and good watering, and you're 95% there. End of talk, almost. But the fun stuff is the 5%. So mineral, we'll call it chemistry. If we get the soil balanced correctly, that's another 4% of the equation, I'd say. And that is things like having available calcium for most plants, available phosphorus for most plants, potassium, the things that we know. But how do you get those into the soil in a form that is available for the plants and the microbes? And I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on that. Some products I like are something called calcium phosphate. It's a mined rock calphos. It says it all. It's got calcium and phosphorus together. There are different brands and different mine sources. Some are ecologically done, appropriately done, and some have heavy metals in them and are not appropriately done. So it's important to do your homework there. I have some sources at the end of my presentation that you can, at least a couple companies you can check with, see who has the ethical, heavy metal free type amendments. The calphos is excellent for calcium and phosphorus. Sulfomag, it's called, or langbeinite. Langbeinite is the mineral that sulfomag is made from, also known as Epsom salts in the drugstore that we can take a bath in and relax our sore muscles. This is sulfur, potassium, magnesium, and a tremendously excellent input for the soil that will give a boost of all three of those minerals. Sulfomag, one of my favorites. And then I want to talk about, you can put all this on the soil and you don't really get a response because your soil is maybe compacted, it's overwatered, it doesn't have the biology it needs. So much of today's work and research in soil is what to do about soil biology. And it's a very fun and almost infinite study. There's much work being done there. I don't know, thousands of microbes being identified. You know, the old saying that a tablespoon of healthy garden soil has more microbes than the entire humanity on Earth. That's all true. I, for one, I love it all, but I also find it very reductionist. If you identify this microbe or that microbe, what I'm going for is more like build it and they will come. If you get your soil structure, moisture, temperature, and have minerals in there, the microbes will proliferate and thrive. However, we can enhance that. And there's another growing movement. I think it's really cool. It's called Korean natural farming, KNF. It's Dr. Cho's work, CHO. If you Google it online, a million things are going to come up about it, and everyone's very going gaga about it. But the neat thing about it, it's all about empowering your own self to not have to go to a nursery or whatever to buy what you need. You kind of generate it from the farm itself. And that's just that's just music to my ears, because I love making my own concoctions at home for our farm or for the garden. And Dr. Cho's work is all about just propagating your own microbes from your own soil. And the advantages to that are manifold. One is, of course, you can save money, and you're kind of propagating microbes that are adapted to your spot. I mean, you're not importing something from the outside that may actually die as soon as it's applied to this soil because it's not adapted to your situation. So you're kind of growing you have this kind of land raised of microbes that are ideally suited to your spot, and you're just enhancing that. And I'll go through a couple recipes in a bit about what that looks like. If you like to cook or play around the kitchen, I don't really know what I do when I cook, but I generally cook at our house, most dinners, and it just tends to be variations on a theme of chopped vegetables and some kind of seasonings. And it's always a lot of fun, even though I never follow recipes, and I'm kind of the same with gardening. But when I'm in the kitchen, I feel a bit like a mad scientist. And when I'm in the garden making these ferments or concoctions, I also feel like a mad scientist. And you can also eat some of these concoctions just to show how safe they are. They're actually, you're not afraid to touch these inputs. They're actually living, healthy, biologically balanced, minerally rich, enzyme rich compounds that can be applied to your plants and soil so that you get more flowers, more fruit, sweeter fruit, crisper vegetables that last longer in the after you've harvested them, that kind of thing. So that's kind of my approach. So the foundation of everything we talk about. Before you do anything else, I think you really should try composting. I hope a lot of you at least try to compost, even if it's in a bucket. I think there's nothing more resurrectional than throwing a bunch of disgusting stuff into a pile in the right way, and then a few months later you have this black, crumbly earth that's maybe full of earthworms and full of vitality that will give this never-ending cycle of life and death and life back into your garden. It's very symbolic. And so I put a recipe up here. I guess I could look at my own screen so I can see what I'm saying. We have cows, and there's nothing better than cow manure because a cow is a four stomach. You know, this ruminant with this, it's a giant, it's a compost pile with legs. And, you know, so that manure, people say, why do you have cows? You're an herb farm, why do you have a cow as a logo? Well, because we feel the cow is, we're almost, we would agree with India there. The cow is sacred. You know, this manure that comes out is such a beautiful, microbially rich starting point to make this fabulous compost. And cows are good for the land if they are managed right. They're bad for the land, of course, like anything is if they're not managed right. So, but most people don't have a cow at their disposal. So kitchen scrap, hair trimmings, shredded cardboard, leaves, of course, are all excellent sources of compost. You want kind of the consistency of a wrung out sponge, as said, for your compost pile. I've learned to add in amendments into the compost itself so that the compost itself kind of assimilates those amendments so that when you put it into the garden, it's already ready to go. It's one approach. I still may, in a brand new garden, may apply into the ground itself some of these powders of calphos, langbonite, azomite, which is a aluminosilicate clay. It's ancient seabed deposit. Every known mineral to human in that product. And I'm not promoting any of this, it's just what I like to use. And then you can even give it a supercharge. I put the bread. We have a friend who's a baker, they have 100 plus employees, so there's huge amounts of bread that are actually returned from the store, and it just tends to go to waste. So you can add some of that to the compost pile with a little bit of grape juice. And why on earth would I do such a thing? Well, it's not really anything part of biodynamics or anything, but a mentor of ours does that. And he mentioned that, well, it's very archetypal. Bread is every element, earth, water, air, fire, is represented in bread. So it's very archetypal. So earth is the grain, water is when you add water to make the flour. The air would be the yeast in this case, or at least the rising process. And then the fire is, of course, baking. So, and then why would you add grape juice? Well, you could say that's a symbology for blood flow. So adding that into a pile that is significant for bringing back things to life is kind of a beautiful imagery. But from a scientific perspective, adding sugars and this floury, yeasty bread is just pure magic for microbes to digest, and that supercharges your compost pile. I don't like a really hot compost pile. This, you know, we used to joke, if you want to start an argument, talk about politics, religion, and nowadays you might want to add COVID into that, or talk about compost, how to make compost. Because everyone has their own methods and own opinions. My personal preference is a cooler, like 130-degree compost. If it's so hot, it actually starts to kill off some of certain microbes and favor others. So a longer, cooler process. The main thing with this, what humified mean is that you have some soil mixed in, like 10%, into the compost pile as you're building the compost you can just throw layers of soil in. And that soil has not only minerals in it, but clay component. And when the humus fraction of the compost starts to form, it begins to bond with the clay of that soil. And that creates what's called a clay humus complex. And that, if you study what makes things come to life, that is life. You really, everything is from the soil that comes to life is based on this clay humus complex. So if you create that yourself in the compost pile first and then apply it, you're creating this very long lasting compost that does not break down so quickly. It's already in kind of a suspended animation. It'll stay in the soil for many, many years. Because humus is something that doesn't break down further, and clay doesn't break down really even further. They're bound together. So this is magic for, particularly for vegetable gardens or any kind of edible gardens. Okay, so clay. Don't forget clay. I know we all have our horror stories with clay gardens, and too much clay is a bad thing too. But a little bit is think of it as a circulatory system for your whole soil. It helps move things. And of course, that seems counterintuitive. If there's too much, it's just this compacted clay blob. But if it's at the right proportion, it's magic. And the property we just bought is very sandy. So we're gonna do a lot of clay magic to get that soil into a very viable, productive, good heart state. Okay, let's move on to. Yeah, that's great. How are we doing? Any questions online or here first? Let's take a breath here a second. We're doing good. So I wanted to talk about, just because I'm a nursery guy too, and having worked at Suncrest where we did make all our soil mixes by the time I left there, container gardens. So yes, you can buy wonderful potting mixes.
So there was one question, sorry, online.
Yeah.
What rate do you add the Epsom salts?
Do I not have that on there? I apologize if I don't.
It was the lubenite, right?
It's the langbeinite, yeah.
Lubenite, sorry.
So thank you for bringing that question, because it raises this other point. Ideally, if you're really starting a big gardening project, it's probably a good idea to get a soil test. If they're only $50 or so, and they can tell you a lot. And there's labs, I know in Watsonville, Perry Lab is one. It's been around forever. There's others. You can get recommendations. That's more expensive, of course, but if you just have the basic analysis and you know how to read basics, you get a sense, what's your pH, what is your potassium level, etc. Those snapshots in time, here they can change, all sorts of conditions can make that change, but it gives you a picture. So to the question, how much do you add? There's the rate on the label is a good place to start if you're not sure. And I can't remember, I'm one of these, I'm kind of back to cooking, I kind of a dash of salt and a bit of this and a pinch of that. I take a handful of the powder and I sprinkle it over probably about 3 by 4, like 12 square feet, something like that. That's just because I have a sense of that's kind of what it means. That is not scientific, obviously, but I think it's hard to overapply the minerals, which is good news because they're not salt fertilizers. Obviously, if you put ammonium nitrate or sulfate on your lawn in a clump, you're going to kill it. But if you put a little too much langbeinite, sulfamag on the ground, it may throw things a little out of balance for a while, but it's slow enough release that it's not going to burn stuff. So I wouldn't be too afraid, but to be doubly sure, if you're doing a bigger project, consider getting the soil test. Okay, so back to soil mixes or potting mixes, excuse me. The first one I have on the old fashioned, this is the way people used to do it, and this is Chadwick's approach. It was 1 part leaf mold, 1 part turf loam, and I'll explain that in a second, and 1 part sharp sand, sharp coarser sand. So leaf mold, I think you probably know, some of you may have access to a part of your garden that has tons of leaves in the fall. Whatever you do, don't get rid of that. You could leave it in place, but if you can sacrifice some, maybe some stuff that falls in the driveway, make a pile of it, maybe shred it up a bit first, You can add a little finished compost as an inoculant and keep it moist and in the shade. And don't forget about it because it takes probably 6 months to a year before it's ready. And it needs to be moist. I mean, it'll do it on its own over several years, but if you want to speed it up, make a pile in the shade and keep it moist over the summer. And then you'll have this beautiful mold, leaf mold called that's nothing's better. Oak, deciduous oak would be the best if you have it, but any deciduous is great. Evergreen can work if it's slower and probably less vital in some ways. You know, we're talking about live oaks, Nancy and I, and it's very, a live oak is kind of almost holly-like texture versus a valley oak or a black oak. So those, but any liquid amber, something like that. So leaf mold is wonderful. That can be just a mulch or a compost in your garden too, but as a potting soil ingredient, excellent. So broken down leaf mold, turf loam, that's really old school, but so that's where you would take a plot of land. In the old days, you would grow, let's say, white clover on there, and maybe once you cut out a square, almost like a turf roll, you know, when you get rolled sod, you would cut that so it has about 2 inches of soil and the clover growing up front. And you remove that and you put it face down, and you put another one face down on top of that, and you start alternating these so that it's this kind of a sandwich of clover sod, clover soil chunks, and you let that sit for about a year or two. That's what turf loam is. So it has the clover brings in nitrogen. It's fixing nitrogen, so that's adding some element of nitrogen. And then of course it's a decent sandy loam or clayey loam soil. You're getting all the minerals and the microbes from that. So I think if you really want to be a sustainable gardener, that's kind of a cool way of just making your own soil mix, and then getting some sand. Now it's a very heavy, old-fashioned mix, but it lasts forever and has proper balanced nutrition. Newfangled mixes are, if you want to learn something about soils, go to a cannabis growing website. Oh my goodness, these guys really know what they're talking about. Well, some do, but the ones that do really do. They're really good. And bonsai websites are good too. About soil mixes for good. But at Suncrest, we had to get the costs down. So there's never an ideal when you're trying to pot up, millions of plants and having to ship them to, let's say, LA or San Diego. You can't have the turf loam soil mix, obviously. That's ridiculous. So you have these artificial mixes. But then my goal was like, how can you bring a little more, almost like more of a garden soil component to a container mix, which is soilless. And our answer, after some kind of, real-time disasters, was to develop a mix that was lightweight, was inexpensive, that held its structure well, and that had a lot of biology in the mix, meaning it had earthworm castings, it had minerals in it, and the mix, this basic soil mix here is not that mix at all. I kind of adapted this mix for maybe a homeowner more, but if you just get, I'm a fan of peat moss, and once again, there's ethical peat moss, and then there's destroy the world peat moss, so you know your source. The humidified compost that you masterfully made a few minutes ago, you could add some of that in there. You can just get those cubes of redwood compost, it's called, at a nursery. And then I love pumice. You could also use perlite as for aeration. I'm a fan of sand. It adds a little weight, but it also adds, you can call it silica, even though it's not really available. It's adding a silica component, which is very important for plants to have silica component in their soil. So have a little bit in the potting mix. And then to those, you can add micronutrients like this kelp meal, gypsum, and cow moss once again. One more thing I wanted to say, it's probably obvious I'm talking all organic amendments at this point. And the reason is, first of all, it's my preference. I feel that is appropriate horticulture. There are places, in fact, in Suncrest, we had to use slow release fertilizers. We had to use certain things. I'm not a purist in that sense, but the reason I'm focusing on the organics is they are beneficial to the microbial life of the soil. And they're slow release. And for a home gardener, there's no reason you want this huge, fast burst of growth, because it would actually, that's what attracts diseases and pests, is when you have things out of balance. So I wanted to mention that's why everything I have is organic, plus we're an organic biodynamic farm, so it makes sense to. But know that there may be times you want to use a little osmocote in the soil mix. Go for it. It can make life a lot easier, I have to say. Okay, let's go on to the next. So you've done all this work on the soil, preparing the soil, getting the tilt right, getting the minerals in there, getting some compost down. But it's still a long, rough world out there during the year. It could be heat waves, it could be cold and foggy, etc. And maybe you're just, the plants are growing so fast, they actually, you think, man, they look a little hungry, despite all my work, and I think they need a little boost. So this is for those, and also for containers, because leaching out of nutrients in a container, of course, is very quick. So having to supplement and augment what you did in preparation with the soil, you have to do now with drenches and sprays. And so here are some of the things I use. Fish hydrolysate. Again, that's different than fish emulsion. So this is cold processed fermented fish hydrolysate. It has the amino acids. It has all the enzymes still in it, unlike fish emulsion, which can be okay, but it doesn't give you all the benefits of fish hydrolysate. Just think of it as like a whole food fish fertilizer, as opposed to when it's been kind of purified and diluted down. So that's kind of the go-to. I would love to get away from it totally. You know, as we all know, it can be a little fragrant. And, you know, we don't also want to just mine the world's oceans so we can have our little vegetable garden. So, you know, understanding where the fish is coming from and all that is important in my opinion. But it is a wonderful source of fertility for the garden. And then as is kelp or seaweed. And the rule here is kind of less is more. You can overdo seaweed and kelp. And these are providing a lot of potassium, minor nutrients, and then again, growth hormones like cytokinins, auxins, all these things that help the plant branch out and hold its form better. So that's a kelp seaweed spray, and I like the liquid in that case. So yeah, biological recharge. So the more we can keep the biology alive in the soil and active, the more it's digesting the locked up nutrients. Let's say you have tons of calcium in your garden. Maybe you applied some, or maybe it was just there naturally, but it's not available. So the microbes are kind of microscopically chewing away, digesting that calcium, which then becomes available for the plant roots. So the more we can keep the microbiology alive, the more we have this consistent nutrient stream. So I mentioned the Korean natural farming. There's another, it's actually it's a Japanese product that's been out for many years that has a huge following around the world. It's called Effective Microorganisms, EM. I think it's wonderful. I don't use it because it's too expensive for my taste, and I don't like the fact that I have to keep buying it. So, but you can make your own through the Korean natural farming, and that's so I'll give you one little funny recipe. I think it's cool. Let's say you have a comfrey plant, or some really vital, even mugwort is sometimes used, or stinging nettle is an excellent fertilizer. So take something like comfrey or stinging nettle, or even chop them up, put them in a 5-gallon bucket, pack it down fairly tight, and then add about half of the, so let's say that's 3 pounds of material, add about half of the weight of that, so let's say 1.5 pounds of brown sugar. And you can use other things, but brown sugar is, for me, it's easiest and it's cheap. And then you put a rock on that and you let it sit for about a week. And it starts to turn into this goo. And it actually will become pretty liquid. And so after a week to 10 days, depending on the temperature of the time of year, you have this liquid goo that is called fermented plant juice. It's not exactly the most imaginative thing, but what that brings is it's bringing in nutrients from those plants. It's bringing enzyme activity and then the microorganisms. All these photosynthetic bacteria. They're called yeast. They're called what else? Well, they wouldn't have mycorrhizae at that stage, but that's another one. So it's bringing the effective microorganisms and lactic acid actually that's also in there too. And all this stuff you get kind of like a jumble in the head, but that fermented plant juice is simply chopped mature sugar, let it sit. You take that resultant liquid, add about a tablespoon per gallon is all you need. And even if you did that every time you watered, you're boosting the microbes and enzymes of your soil so that the plants in the soil themselves can keep working. And again, it's if you did it really cleanly and rightly, you could even take a tablespoon yourself. It's safe stuff. So, one thing to preserve that. So here I'm going to go one more step. There's something called lactic acid bacteria. We all know it. It's in yogurt. The whey in yogurt, the liquid on top is full of lactic acid. And lactic acid is it's funny enough, it's antibiotic. It's protective. It stimulates other organisms to do their work. So it's used a lot in, let's say, chicken coops. If you spray lactic acid bacteria ferment on the ground, it creates this probiotic leaf litter for the chicken coop that reduces smell and flies, which is wonderful. But lactic acid in the garden itself and on the plant itself is antifungal, antibiotic, and pro-micro. So the way you make that, one more recipe here, you get a bag of rice, any kind of rice, and you just simply rinse it through a colander and shake it around, keep rinsing it, and get like maybe half a gallon of that liquid. And then you can cook the rice for dinner, but you want that liquid, that rice rinse water. And you let that sit just in your kitchen or in your bedroom, whatever. Done that in our bedroom a few times, maybe with a piece of cheesecloth over it. And just for 2 or 3 days, and you'll start to see a little white film forming on that. And that's all this collection of yeast and bacteria starting to form. Then you get a gallon of milk, preferably oxidized, even more preferably raw milk if you can find it, but that's expensive. And you pour that in. So you combine those two things into a larger container. Just pour the milk at about 8 parts of milk to 1 part of the rice water. And you let that sit for about a week as well. You get the classic curds and whey. The curds will float to the top of that liquid. And then at the bottom is all that lactic acid bacteria enriched whey that was nourished by the rice water. And so that clear yellowish liquid is magic lactic acid bacteria. And you can use little bits of that with the plant ferment juice to enhance that. But it also said you could put some in your compost pile to aid in digestion of that pile. You can spray it around the garbage area to keep flies away, etc. Lactic acid bacteria. Couple questions. Yeah, first. Can
you repeat the parts, the milk?
Yeah.
Rice water?
So I think it's about. I mean, I'm pretty loose with these. About. I would just take a gallon of milk, and then put in about a quart. Yeah, that's more than I said, but I think a quart of the rice water, something like that. it's just feed or kind of a base to help stimulate the lactic acid bacteria to dominate. So nothing else dominates.
How long are we gonna let the mouth?
It's about a week. Usually, again, a lot of this depends on temperature, indoor or outdoor, and also, you know, that. And so during the moon phase, if you're near full moon, it's gonna be a lot faster than it's a new moon. So just watch it, and you'll see it totally separates out. You have this chunky, almost like cottage cheese on the top, and then the waves on the bottom. And that's, I mean, I call it wave.
Spray that, can you spray that around animals?
Yep, totally safe.
On the lines?
Yep, you're really trying to get after the of course, the maggots before the flies, but yeah, so it's a process to keep that down. Yes. Yeah, I mean, you could eat them, or probably, if you're not comfortable, if you have chickens, of course, the worst case, you can put it in the compost, but any kind of, or if you have earthworm, you know, they're great for a number of things. If you're really clean throughout the whole process, they're fine to eat, honestly. Okay. Well, okay, so despite all our efforts, sometimes we have imbalances in the garden, and so neem is a great pesticide, fungicide that's from the neem tree, has a doctrine, and it's great because it has a lot of fatty acids itself. So even though it's good at it's as a pesticide and fungicide, it's also providing a bit of you could say foundational growth for microorganisms for the good guys. So neem is a good product to use. Equisetum horsetail, and if you have horsetail growing on your property, or if you kind of know a natural area that it's okay to poach from a little bit, just harvest some stems of horsetail, chop it up in a bucket, let it sit again for a week to 2 weeks, and you'll get this somewhat sulfury smelling liquid that often turns reddish, and then it's ready to use. Same thing, it's more of a prophylactic. It's not, if you have mildew and you spray that on, it's not going to take care of the mildew. But if you spray it on before you have mildew, you are helping to prevent mildew, for example. Okay, let's go on to the last. Okay, now I get a little bit more fun after how long I've been gardening, but you kind of want to try new things. So one of my newer discoveries is that the mentor of ours, Dennis Klochek, his information is at the bottom after this slide, but making more ferments. One is Rejuvelac. I used to drink Rejuvelac years ago. It's simply wheat berries that have been sprouted in water, and it's a process, but you create this lactic acid rich Rejuvelac. It's almost in the direction of lemonade, but not as nice and without any sugar. But the name says that it's kind of rejuvenating. You're like, go! But it actually turns out, because it's so full of enzymes and microbes, it's excellent for the garden. It's very easy to make. So if any of you happen to sprout, let's say you make alfalfa sprouts or sunflower sprouts in your kitchen, it's the same process. But in this case, you're not trying to get the sprouts, you're trying to get the liquid from the sprouts. And that's what Rejuvelac is. I think it's a little too detailed to go into the recipe itself, but if you Google it, I hate to say that, but or I have a link of his video below on making Rejuvelac, and then simply combining that with the coconut water, they're kind of these bottles you can buy and drink. If you do 50-50 that itself is a great protector of seedlings. You're protecting from damping off, for example. It's also stimulating the rooting and growth of seedlings. But you can also get even fancier by taking this resultant mix of 50-50 Rejuvelac and coconut, using it with herbs. You can put, let's say, lemon balm, which is a very potent herb tea, to let it ferment into a vinegar. You let it for about 10 days. Vinegar is a very potent, even stronger spray you can use on the same thing, seedlings, gardens. It's really good if you're, let's say you want to harvest your basil, it's starting to wanting to flower, and you want to get more harvest out of it, and then also you want more richer essential oils in basil, so you have the best pesto in the world. That's the kind of spray you would use to enhance the essential oil content of herbs. And we do stuff like this on our farm because we're trying to harvest these medicinal components of the plants so that our herbal concoctions are of the highest quality. So that's why I get into this stuff, but anyone can do it. It can even work for enhancing flavor of the tomato, for example. So last one, which is probably the least talked about because it's unusual, but taking gems. So a gem is considered a flower of the mineral world, right? It looks like a flower. If you look at an amethyst, it's almost as if the mineral world bloomed, and that's a gem. So that gesture helps plants get their, you could say, if the metals and the minerals in gems with their very strong formative forces are then transferred onto a leaf and to a plant, and the plant itself is able to absorb that metal and mineral and form into itself to create a stronger form and a more resilient plant. That's kind of the idea behind this stuff. I won't go into it too much because I don't expect all of you to be making gem milks. We do, we put them in our products, our skincare, but I also make ferments out of the, with these as an additive to add to our cabbages in particular because we make sauerkraut. So amethyst and cabbages are very good pairings. And I know that sounds very unfamiliar and perhaps even a bit strange, but it shows the potential of learning to read the book of nature. And if you can understand the mineral kingdom as much as the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom and the human kingdom, we can begin to see these synergies. And if we combine them in the correct ways at correct times, we can actually enhance the health of our soil, our plants, and ourselves, and our animals. So I'm going to stop there because it's 8:45. Maybe you can go to that. Oh, just so you guys can see the resource page. Okay,